morning. I'm Kristen Balasia, Head of Automotive Advisory at IHS Markit, and welcome to this edition of Fuel for Thought. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues Bjoern Huetter, Director of Product Management, and Ali Khalili, Director of Automotive Advisory. Good morning, or should I say good afternoon, gentlemen?
Good morning, good afternoon, Kristen. Thank you for having me.
It's good afternoon, Kristen. Happy to be here.
Today, we're going to be talking about 2020 year in review around the globe. When I looked up the most overused words in 2020, of course, you see COVID and social distancing, but you also see unprecedented and pivot. And certainly based on these unprecedented times, the automotive industry in particular has had to pivot. So Bjoern, why don't we start by level setting on the numbers for 2020 across the three major regions, China, Europe, and US, just to kind of ground our conversation. And then we can dig into more of the details behind the numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Kristen. Certainly, 2020 was a pivotal year for the global automotive industry. I think it's fair to say that. Now, if we want to turn our attention to three of the main regions, then we can see that China was affected the earliest and saw volumes plunge in February 2020 by 78% versus prior year. Now, from a seasonally adjusted annual rate perspective, at that time, they were trending at just 5.3 million in February. And just for perspective, in 2019, China finished at 23 million units. But the market recovered at a remarkable pace that was driven by pent-up demand and a surging need for delivery service vehicles. Also, that demand was fueled by a mix of government subsidies, as well as local and city level incentives. All in, China ended 2020 with an almost moderate minus 6.5% versus 2019. United States saw the trough about 2 months later than China, and in April, sales had almost halved versus prior year and was trending at a seasonally adjusted annual rate of just about 10 million. And then, with the recovery setting in, it was much less pronounced than in China. So the United States ended the full year with just 14 million units, which was down by 16% versus 2019. And finally, Central and Western Europe have probably been hit the hardest in terms of percentage decline. Just like the US, the European Big Five, that is Germany, the UK, France, Italy, and Spain, really hit the rock bottom in April. And at that time, the SAAR rates were trending at really just 2.5 million units. But to counterbalance, a number of stimulus programs and incentives helped to reignite demand. Nevertheless, the Big Five lost about 3 million units, making it down 25% versus prior year.
Yeah, and you mentioned how quickly this really spread across the globe. And I think many in the industry thought early in the year, maybe it was isolated to a region, maybe it was going to be for a period of time. But we saw some, just as you highlighted, some incredible and some severe troughs and slowdown in sales. But then, it did offer that acceleration and opportunity for things like the pace of e-mobility, BEV actions that were taken in certain areas, and a mixed global response based on timing and what people were seeing and what really the industry across the board worked to do to pivot and to come out of this and to really find those areas where there was opportunity. So Ali, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you're right, Kristen. There was, some opportunity, and I think it's interesting, especially to look at the makeup of vehicle sales rather than just looking, at the decreases. So, what's happened is, especially in Europe, there's been a record increase in share of battery electric and plug-in hybrid as a share of the total market. So this has, over the past 2 years, we've seen this occur in markets such as Norway, some of the Scandinavian markets where, they are very much now, let's say, EV dominated. What's interesting is this COVID crisis has resulted in Germany, for example, which has in the past been a market which is, let's say, not so progressive in terms of electrification, to really have a record increase in share of BEV sales. So, they are now a significant chunk of the new vehicle sales market. And, why has this happened? Well, the governments have reacted as part of their stimulus packages, stimulus programs. They've really integrated environmentally friendly policies into that. So, we see this for electric vehicles now with Germany, where the government has increased the amount of subsidy that a customer can benefit from when buying an electric vehicle. Additional 3,000 euros was allocated to offset the additional cost of electric vehicles. And these kind of EV beneficial subsidies, they really have had an effect. So I think that's one of the major market dynamics, and one of the positives is that those companies which have taken that difficult move to pivot towards electrification are now seeing the rewards for that through increased market share.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that was certainly a lot of the questions we were getting early on was, what is this going to mean for some of these things that require such significant investment or government action, et cetera? Is there going to be a contraction? And kind of everyone just trying to hunker down and get through this, or is there going to be, further investment and seeing people trying to take this as an opportunity to drive certain initiatives that, have been ongoing for a period of time? So if we look at, the OEMs around the world and some of the things they were doing in particular, Bjoern, what were some of the more effective responses that we saw?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's interesting to see that some companies have been able to benefit from the crisis more than others, and particularly when we look at across China, United States, and also Europe's big five, then essentially three brands are standing out in terms of market share gains versus prior year, and those three are Tesla, Toyota, and Mercedes. Now, Tesla has been a front runner by adapting and offering touchless test drives, which is probably now part of the new normal going forward, and introduced that concept, well, first of all in China, and then successively across the globe. But they're certainly not the only ones who have pivoted. And there are other examples of Mercedes, for example, introducing free home delivery in Germany, with ads coming out that were showing an E-Class, I think it was, wrapped in a package similar to an Amazon's parcel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's interesting that you mentioned kind of similar to an Amazon parcel, because this is also what we're seeing, probably another discussion we could have around consumer preferences, what people are experiencing now that they will get used to and look for or expect or demand as we do come out of this and we are able to move about more freely, still wanting some of those conveniences and looking to other areas of our lives. In many areas of the world, people have really embraced this at-home services, whether that's, groceries, whether that's dinner, whether that's vehicles, right? And so it'll be really interesting to see. This has certainly accelerated some of these activities and digital interactions and capabilities, but who will the brands be that do that well, that can in many cases gain loyalty or have conquest opportunities based on how they serve and interact with the customer's vehicle versus just the vehicles that they provide. And we talk about convenience, trumping loyalty and other traditional ways that we evaluate what vehicle we want to drive or what brand we want to be affiliated with. So as we look forward, Ali, what do we expect to see that will continue to present challenges? We've talked about some of the things that have moved us forward and that are innovative. So what do we see that are still going to be the challenges, and then the future opportunities that'll help drive this continued recovery, and where will the investments be deployed?
Well, I think two notable challenges are, firstly, just the pace of recovery of vehicle sales. Considering the economic effects from the crisis may not really be felt until well after, the vaccination period, well after restrictions are eased. That's going to be one of the central questions on the minds of automakers. When can we go back to that level of sales and, sales-based revenue as we had in 2019 and earlier? But I think the second interesting challenge or notable challenge is really what about the longer term effects from this crisis? And that is looking at the question of work from home, for example, and maybe a shift in consumer mindset about what they do with their time in the day. Will that have an effect on the whole idea of purchasing and owning a vehicle? So I think with those two challenges, there are opportunities that automakers and those in the supply chain can take advantage of. Looking at that first point about the recovery speed back to normal, if there will be a normal. Well, there are opportunities for automakers to take advantage of this widespread adoption of consumers of digital retail. Looking at the Chinese market, it was very clear that consumers are willing to purchase vehicles online. Already, those business concepts were occurring for some time. But for example, in Europe and US, there's been a shift in consumer mentality where more and more buyers are willing to purchase or order a vehicle online. And through the example of companies like Tesla, as Bjoern mentioned, but also looking at Stellantis, NIO, these are OEMs and automakers who are, taking advantage of the situation through increasing their online retail capability, through offering, contactless test drives, through their home delivery, really setting themselves up for a good recovery. And at the same time, on the second point, this long-term implications of work from home, I think the companies which are, pivoting towards offering new mobility services, so, no longer just relying on vehicle sales for their business, but also offering, car sharing, ride sharing, any kind of micromobility. I think that's going to be an opportunity as, some of the countries will maybe continue to work more and more from home in the future. Gives consumers a new ability to experience, car usage rather than just car ownership.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points. And it's interesting because these opportunities and challenges, they're so interrelated, right? So, the opportunity to engage with the customer in a different way or increase offerings or expand, how you engage with your customers is a fantastic opportunity. But we also talk to a lot of our clients about how to make sure that they do it well, because if they don't, suddenly it has, a significant negative impact. And so instead of an opportunity, they could potentially be, disenfranchising customers and moving in a direction they don't want to. And through this recovery, as you pointed out, Ali, that's going to be so critical that they do, as long as we have a fire on all cylinders here, right? So final question for both of you, Ali and Bjoern. What are you most interested in seeing in 2021? And unbelievably, we're already, 2.5 months into the year. We made it through 2020, but we haven't made it through COVID. I don't think anyone would say that yet. But what are you most excited about or interested, I guess, in seeing across the rest of this year?
Well, I think for my side, I'm most interested to see, what's going to be the situation with a lot of these new EV startup makers who are entering the market. Over the past year, there's been a huge wave of new players coming into the market. Companies like Fisker, you have Xiaopeng, and these are all new players. WM Motors in China. And so there are really new players who are following that model, that precedent that Tesla set, a decade ago. And for me, it's really going to be interesting to see how these companies will bring innovations into the market and whether or not they'll be able to really become true industry competitors to some of the established automakers. So that's going to be interesting to see this year.
Bjoern, what about you?
So yeah, as you mentioned at the very beginning, Kristen, there's been almost an overuse of pivotal and unprecedented. Equally, just like Ali and myself have done over the course of this discussion, there was a lot of talk about the new normal. So when it comes to 2021, I'm very curious to see more of that new normal and what in fact it looks like.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think at this point, we're all choosing to look out across the year with some interest and excitement, maybe more than trepidation, maybe some cautious optimism, I'll say. So thank you. We touched on a lot of topics I think we could have dove into more deeply and good topics for future discussions, but I really appreciate, I want to thank you, Bjoern and Ali, for your time today and for joining this episode of Fuel for Thought. We'll be back with more Fuel for Thought next month. To opt into our newsletter that provides more information on this topic and others, visit ihsmarket.com/auto newsletter.